So, what was the last most useless photography equipment or upgrade that you brought? I'll be interested to hear your opinion on this because I know we all buy photography gear and sometimes it's just a gimmick, isn't it? So, you kind of get it and you've never used it since. So, I asked Reddit this question to see what other fellow photographers in the Ask Photography community would say. I'm going to basically bring you their answers because it's always interesting to see and compare the things that we should avoid as photographers. There's already enough gear out there. We don't want to add to our gear. So I gave my example as a newer stabilizer with a gimbal handheld. It sits in this case still over there. It's just never kind of got me in the right position with it. Considering I use a DSLR, which is quite heavier with a good lens, it's kind of tricky. So I've got 47 comments here. A majority of these guys mentioned the lens ball. So it's something to have funky shots with, and they've not been happy with it. I can see a few people mentioning it here that actually in the afternoon light, it acts like a magnifying glass, so it kind of burns, and you want to avoid that at all costs. There's another couple of comments here about ultra wide filter sets, macro flashes, time lapse tools, gimbals, and so on. So some of those might be useful if you know what you're doing with them, but most occasions it's kind of needs a bit too much setting up, and most people give up with them. But if that's where your focus is, persist with it, and you will actually come to a situation where they'll be handy. Okay, we've got a few other ones here, and I bought a gummed up Agfa Isolate 2 for 40 in Australia, thinking I'd clean it up. I took 3 screws out and found the screwdriver I was using was about too big and couldn't get the next screw, so stopped and never. I'd ordered a smaller set, so it sits in the drawer with the screws taped to the lid of my university degrees tube. So it's those little projects that we kind of never get around to completing, I suppose it sounds like. And there's a few other little suggestions here about uh, flash diffusers are such a scam in general. When used correctly, they certainly work, but it doesn't really matter if you're using a $50 optimized diffuser or some white plastic food packaging. That's like the special filters that you get to filter the light into a round kind of ball to make it more nice on the face. Since since they've been out, that's it. Gary Fong diffusers are pretty easy to find and sale. I get one for $10. It's not as versatile, but it's a lot lighter. So that's a few suggestions. Over the summer, I bought a Mamiya Super 23 press camera that needed a bit of work, thinking that I was being really clever with finding a slightly cheaper medium format system camera with inexpensive lenses and changeable backs. Instead, I bought a huge, heavy, inelegant brick which sits on my shelf because it's just too big to do anything with. It's almost as big as a Graflex, Graflex, which sort of defeats the purpose of medium format over large format. I'm now trying to sell this beast to get something a little more portable and stylish. It makes good wall deco. I bought a big square ND filter and was too cheap to buy the $200 filter holder, so I designed and 3D printed one. Oh wow, yeah, 3D print is a whole new situation now. You can do a lot of hacks with that and actually get something a bit more interesting. It was great, but as I was testing the draft, I slipped and broke the $150 filter in half, so that sucks. 2 Nikon tally converters. Yes, that's something good to have on the list actually. Just not happy with the sharpness. Sometimes you kind of start with some cheaper alternatives, discover, wait a minute, they're not as good as just getting a macro lens, for example, or something like that, or in some situations, getting a longer focal length camera. Some other people mention about understand that they are only worthwhile with super sharp primes, and they may or may not be worthwhile with a high resolution body. Same here. A lot of people have mentioned the third party 1.6 makes the viewfinder too dim on my long lenses. So that's converters, teleconverters extending your range. I had a Canon one on my 70 to 200, and that performed all right. It made the 2.8 into a f4, but I got the extra distance. I did a few cricket shots with that, I remember. Going medium format, digital, if so, why? According to my wife, it was a 5D Mark IV. She didn't seem to see the need to upgrade from 30D. So yeah, other people won't get it's what we do with camera upgrades, because obviously we use cameras and we'll understand what the upgrade was for. That's justifying it to us, isn't it? Someone else mentioned here, I recently bought home autofocus lens that was just amazing. It was just amazing waste of money for me. I expected it would make me take photos faster, but it didn't. I'm not used to autofocus and it's painfully slow and limiting, so I have it. I'm sad I wasted so much money, but I'm not using it. Got any more info on that? What camera system are you using? That'd be interesting to know actually. I get that some people prefer using manual focus, especially to in difficult lighting, but for most people, autofocus is a godsend. Okay, another interesting one here. I got a cold shoe mount for my Sony X300 to mount on top of my full frame bodies so I could take video while taking photos. For some reason, I thought that would be a rad idea. It was not. Actually, that is a decent idea, because if you're taking photos and you want to show the perspective you're looking at, you can drop an action camera on top of your DSLR to give that point of view. Okay, someone's actually said that. I've done that with a GoPro. It's not bad, but I find out just having it head mounted was just as good. Oh, that's interesting. Bought a Z6 when a D3300 was working perfectly fine and good enough for my needs. Yeah, sometimes we just end up buying gear when we don't actually really need it. There's a few more suggestions here about extension tubes. I hardly use them. Definitely use a prime with extension tubes, and there's a bit of conversation about that. I'll put a link to this Reddit post that I created in the description so you can read about it, but it's mainly pancake lens I suggested here. Impulse buy, used it twice as I already covered at that focal length. Yeah, sometimes you already have lenses that you don't really need. Someone suggested here that they bought I was about to say the Tamron lens, but I bought for my Sony because I somehow overlooked that it was an A mount instead of an E mount and had to buy an adapter. But then your last sentence reminded me sometimes buying the right lens helps, but you can have adapters then which kind of defeats the object. Moody presets, I was never happy with anything I bought. I realized later that the clean look I get when editing alone is what will land me clients anyway. That was a quick look at Reddit and the question I asked to the community about what was your last most useless photography upgrade. Let me know what yours is, and I'll link you to this playlist right here. Make sure to check that out, which has additional questions relating to photography, where the community lets us know from a different perspective, photography related. Sometimes it's not about the gear, we have other questions as well. So it'll be interesting to check that out.